Hello, friends. You're on the channel where we don't just describe events, we uncover what lies beneath them, the logic behind the words, the fear behind the logic, and the true face of power hidden behind that fear. After Trump's phone call with Putin and his follow-up meeting with Zelensky, many expected the White House to draw a clear line, either to strengthen support for Kiev or to push for new negotiations. Instead, we got a pause. The same Trump who only weeks earlier called Russia a paper tiger and promised severe sanctions suddenly switched to a language of ambiguity and caution. That shift wasn't accidental. It revealed something deeper than policy. It exposed psychology. Today's analysis is about a man who built his image around strength, yet now seems trapped by his own fear of power. Over the past few months, Trump's tone has changed several times, from aggressive confidence to deliberate restraint. Before the Alaska summit, he spoke like a man convinced of his global authority. He promised serious consequences if Russia refused to negotiate with Ukraine. But after meeting Putin in Alaska, his rhetoric softened dramatically. After their last phone conversation, his voice grew even quieter. And now, following the meeting with Zelensky, we see the familiar pattern. A leader who talks about strength but avoids situations where strength must actually be used. He could have reinforced America's global position, confirmed its leadership, and sent a clear signal to both allies and Moscow. Instead, he chose explanations. We can't transfer missiles. We need them ourselves. We don't want escalation. We seek peace, but not at any cost. Different words, same instinct, the instinct to avoid responsibility. Because in Trump's world, responsibility is risk, and risk is danger. Once again, he's shown that loud words and formal authority don't guarantee inner resolve. And the higher his office, the sharper the contrast between outer confidence and inner hesitation. When a politician changes his stance once, it can be called pragmatism. When he does it repeatedly, it becomes a pattern, a reflection of character. Trump's statements live one day at a time. Today, he's confident. Tomorrow, cautious. The day after, contradictory. Behind this rhetorical turbulence lies what every true leader dreads most: fear of responsibility. Before his latest call with Putin, Trump's tone was entirely different. In late September 2025, he wrote on Truth Social, "Putin and Russia are in deep economic trouble. They look like a paper tiger." That phrase spread across every major news agency. The President of the United States calling Russia a paper tiger became a symbol of newfound boldness. He even added, "Russia has been fighting a pointless war for 3.5 years. A real military power would have won it in a week." Those words sounded like the return of his 2016 persona. Blunt, self-assured, unfiltered. He mocked Russia's army, called Putin a loser, and framed himself once again as the world's ultimate deal-maker. But within weeks, the tone changed beyond recognition. After a 2-hour call with the Kremlin, that swagger turned into silence. The paper tiger phrase vanished, replaced by talk of restraint and avoiding escalation. The man who once measured politics in deals began speaking in delays. By the time of his meeting with Zelensky, that transformation was complete. He was no longer avoiding confrontation. He was justifying passivity. His line, "America needs those missiles for itself," didn't sound like a policy argument. It sounded like a man trying to hide indecision behind the logic of prudence. Look at the chronology, and it becomes clear. Before Putin, bold statements, a show of strength, even provocation. After Putin, restraint, vagueness, long pauses. This isn't diplomacy. It's fear of a decision that can't be undone. Trump's latest meeting with Zelensky changed the tone of Washington's role in the conflict. There were no strong statements, no sharp words, and that absence became the main message. The first thing that stood out was a visible drop in political confidence. If in early September Trump spoke in absolutes, calling Russia weak and its war futile, by the time he faced Zelensky, that language was gone. It was replaced by cautious formulas. America supports peace. We must act responsibly. No one should impose their will. Such a shift from conviction to hesitation always signals an inner conflict between belief and fear. The second change was in his syntax. When Trump feels strong, he speaks in commands. We will. When he doubts, he switches to deliberation. We'll consider. We'll see. We'll weigh our options. That linguistic retreat exposes a man unwilling to commit when the stakes are high. The third point is symbolic. Zelensky's visit was meant to test America's reliability. One strong gesture could have reaffirmed U.S. leadership. Instead, we got the line. Those missiles are needed here, at home. In other words, the United States is no longer the donor of security, but merely a spectator. And that's a signal not only to Kyiv, but to Europe as well. Washington no longer sets the agenda. It adapts to it. Finally, there's the psychological dimension. Trump increasingly uses the language of rationality to mask indecision. Saving resources sounds pragmatic, but it's really about the fear of acting beyond one's control. For a leader who built his image on power, that fear becomes corrosive. It strips away the core of leadership. Confidence in one's own decisions, and everyone sees it. Allies, aides, analysts, and ordinary voters. They all sense that America's assertiveness has turned into waiting. What we're witnessing isn't just a change in rhetoric. It's a shift in the nature of governance itself. Trump acts less like a politician and more like a man avoiding risk. Initiative has disappeared, and with it, the sense of direction. He no longer shapes events. He reacts to them. For Ukraine, this means uncertainty. Every new statement is interpreted not as U.S. policy, but as Trump's personal mood. That weakens not just trust in Washington, but the credibility of America's institutions. For Europe, the consequences are equally serious. European leaders have grown used to America setting the rhythm. Now, when Washington hesitates, Brussels stalls. Germany and France lack the political and military independence to replace U.S. leadership. And so the whole continent becomes hostage to the emotional trajectory of one man in the Oval Office. For Russia, this hesitation opens a window of opportunity. Moscow sees that Washington won't act decisively and uses the pause to push harder, both on the front line and in diplomacy. Every time Trump talks about restraint or balance, the Kremlin hears, "America won't intervene." But perhaps the most dangerous effect is internal. When a leader fears decisions, the system begins to delay itself. Bureaucracy becomes a shock absorber, waiting for the crisis to decide on its own. That erodes the very idea of American leadership. The resources remain, but the will to use them fades, and that's the real paradox. The president who promised to make America great, again is slowly teaching the world that greatness, without resolve, is just an illusion. Trump's indecision has turned into a strategic vulnerability. It shapes how allies see America, how adversaries test it, and how the world interprets U.S. power. The longer this ambiguity lasts, the more space it leaves for others. Russia, China, Turkey, or Europe to fill the vacuum. American foreign policy is becoming a system where statements replace actions and silence becomes a strategy. For a superpower, that's not caution. It's decline. Trump no longer defines strategy. He reacts to events he was meant to anticipate. Every speech, every meeting shows not leadership, but justification. He talks about peace, but offers no path to it. He speaks of restraint while losing control over the momentum of war. He insists that America needs its own missiles. But what he's really protecting is not America's arsenal. It's his own uncertainty. It's a paradox of power. The man who commands the strongest nation on earth behaves like someone afraid to act. And in a world that watches every sign of hesitation, fear itself becomes a message. If Trump fears a weakened Russia, imagine how he'd respond to a strong China. That's the question the world is already beginning to ask.